Hello and welcome to the Runpoint podcast. I am your host, Matthew Hall. This is a podcast about AI mostly, and sometimes about private equity. And I'm joined by my partner and co-star, Sam. Sam, how you doing today?
Doing great, Matthew. How you doing?
I'm doing great as always. So we've got 3 segments for you today. We're going to start with some news and notes from the world of AI. In case you haven't been paying much attention, we'll try to bring you up to speed as quickly and efficiently as possible. So Sam, let's jump in there. First thing we want to talk about is Google just released, I think yesterday or the day before, their new image model, codenamed Nano Banana. I think it's pretty incredible. I want to know if you have any early takes, but I think we should walk folks through how to actually use it and what they should do.
Yeah, it's hard to find. So I think that would probably be the most valuable thing. Early takes, I don't know. It's way better than anything else that we've seen. It's essentially a Photoshop killer. I think would be a good way to put that. We were just doing YouTube thumbnails. So if you were watching this on YouTube, the thumbnail will almost certainly be created by Nano Banana. And I've heard people talk about how many companies you might be able to start just on Nano Banana alone. The idea that it's opening up a bunch of use cases. I'm struggling to wrap my head around exactly what that means, but I suspect it's something around all of these visions people have had for, the last couple of years of doing product ads using AI tech, where prior to Nano Banana, you couldn't actually manipulate existing images in the way that you wanted. We keep seeing incremental steps here, and this one finally feels like it's going to be usable for many, many more people and a bunch more different use cases.
Totally. I want to share a couple tests I've had so far. So like Sam was mentioning, YouTube thumbnails, which isn't applicable to all that many people. You can imagine this for really any kind of slideware, anything that incorporates images. What's great about this is it's really good at persisting people, so maintaining the same person or character in multiple different frames. And so I think the applications for animation are kind of there. All of these things are still very proof of concept. I feel like this time a year ago, we were all thinking that whole movies were going to be made and generated from AI. That I still think we're far away from that. Right now, it seems like you can generate 8-second clips consistently of video. But so, for instance, here's what it did with a screenshot of a latest YouTube video of ours. And I said, create me a YouTube thumbnail that stops the scroll and is highly stylized. And you can see it more or less persisted my face, and gave me a better beard than I have. But it did a good job at that, and it got all the text correct, which is
Looks like you, which is different from what we've seen
exactly
before.
it is. But then we kind of got wild with it and made it do some dumb things, and it gave Sam laser eyes, and put us in the Matrix. But I think an even cooler experiment. This was the exact test I gave the last version of this, which was for an interior design use case because my wife's an interior designer. And so I gave it this picture of, our back breakfast area of our house and told it to wallpaper the walls. And wallpaper is a very difficult thing for AI to do because it's patterned, right? It is textured and patterned. It's not a single color. And so the previous version of this failed spectacularly at this exact same test. And so the first thing it did, I told it to change the chair in the middle, see that, and wallpaper it. And it wallpapered the back wall only, but it did it. And it got the texture right. It got the shadows
Pretty
right.
good.
It looks pretty good. And then with a couple more prompts, I said, hey, do the other wall. Hey, do the other wall. It got all of it. And obviously, I didn't have it pick a wallpaper. It picked one. Looks kind of like a grandma's house now. But
you could give it a wallpaper texture, and I bet it would do it.
It does. And that is the room. It didn't change the dimensions of it. It kept the bench, it kept the lighting even across it. And so then I gave it a sample wallpaper. Yep. And it
Nailed
grabbed
it.
It nailed it. And it did the same thing. I'm going to have to, then tell it to do the back wall and the left wall. But I mean, I think that's incredible that it was able to actually take a reference material and put it on there. I think that's immediately useful for people in these sorts of fields.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. I remember we talked about this when the GPT-4o image update came out, I don't know, 2-3 months ago. And we were so impressed at its ability to persist in this exact scenario. But it would change the windows a little bit. It would put a door in a slightly different place than it was. And so it was a little bit hard to use, but this is perfect.
Yeah. Yeah. Incredible.
Can you show the dog example that I just sent you?
I can.
So I took my dog and told it to turn the dog into a levitating Buddha dog.
Okay.
All right, there's the input of the dog that I wanted to share. And here is the output.
I don't see any. There it is.
Pretty good.
That's pretty good.
It looks just like my dog. Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think this is really impressive. I'm curious where it might get used in real businesses. Like the example that we talked about when 4.0 came out was real estate. If you imagine, this is exactly the example we use. It's just more powerful now. If you imagine how much money gets spent on rendering by architects, it's going to completely transform that. Why would you ever spend thousands of dollars on that when you can do this by yourself?
Totally. I think that's a good segue from GPT 4.0 to GPT-5. Other big announcement of the last couple of weeks is GPT-5 was rolled out by OpenAI. I'll start with my first take on this, which is that the PR machines of these companies are getting way better. The announcement, everything surrounding the announcement made this seem like it was the second coming, like it was literally the Death Star being brought out, that AGI was here. They got all of the developers I respect on Twitter to simultaneously say that this is the greatest tool they've ever used and that they'll never need to use anything else for coding ever again. It was to the point that, I was previously a Plus subscriber, and the day that GPT-5 was announced and I figured I could only get it if I upgraded to Pro, I dropped my $200 immediately to test it out. Now, that was the hype. Let's talk about the reality. What have you found for GPT-5 since you started using it, Sam?
I'm pro GPT-5. So yes, the hype was overblown. No, it can't do everything. However, it's very good. I'm using it quite a lot for coding now, where I have the Pro Opus account and now the Pro GPT account as well. And for each project, I have two windows open, one for each. What GPT-5 does really well, in my opinion, it moves fast. So it's a lot more pleasant to work with, and it kind of feels like it used to feel a little bit in the early days of vibe coding. And it does a pretty good job, I think, of planning. For execution, I find that Opus still does a better job. And of course, we're just talking about coding now.
Right. And because I want to add the caveat, it's fast when you're working in the CLI. When you're working in OpenAI, chatgpt.com in the browser, just chatting with the thing, I find that only the thinking model is worth a damn at all. That if you let it choose for itself, it's a pretty frustrating experience as well. And so I find that everything that I used to do with ChatGPT kind of takes longer, because I would sort of previously default to 4.0 or 4.1 and move to 0.3 when I wanted to have a richer conversation. And I knew that there was trade-offs there. And now it seems like I have to wait for a progress bar every time I have any question for ChatGPT, which is no more conversational, really.
Yep. I think that's totally true. I just feel like for me, the trade-off, even in ChatGPT, for the quality that I get from GPT-5 with the weight, assuming you put it into thinking mode, it's worth it. I think the quality is significantly better than 0.3. But people debate this stuff. And the other thing that makes this really hard, if not impossible to talk about, is GPT-5 isn't one thing. The snapshot reflecting the quality of GPT-5 or Anthropic Opus 4.1 changes on a daily or hourly basis.
Yep.
Everybody knows this. I don't hear a ton of people talking about it, but we act as if, GPT-5 is great when it first comes out because it actually is better than it is now.
Well,
They're
this is
clearly
even a different
nerfing
cycle.
these
It
things.
really seems that the people that got advanced usage of it were given the creme de la creme, the folks that were invited to OpenAI before it was announced and did their coding tests with it, and they all invariably came back with, this is the best coding tool I've ever used and it can do everything. I'm astounded, all this sort of stuff. That was not the version that they actually announced, that they launched to the public on the day that, the day GPT-5 was announced, because it really seemed like the first 48 hours were rough. And you had Sam Altman and you had their PR teams again kind of scrambling about how they were going to change some weights and they were going to move some things around. And backpedal a little bit on that, we're going to pick in the background of what model we actually pass your request to. And we're going to expose the controls a little bit more to the users. It's a fascinating...
Yeah, not to mention all the people who...
Yeah.
I was just going to say, not to mention all the people who made ChatGPT 4.0 their boyfriend.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And who clamored for it to come back. And they got it back.
Yep.
It's back.
It's
Yeah.
it really does make it's a head scratcher. We've previously on this show complained about the branding and naming I have of all of these different AI tools. And so there's a bit of genius in just wrapping it all under GPT-5 and trying to obscure that from the user. And, they are just this interface that you chat with, and they do their best to serve you the right AI, the right LLM for whatever the task is. But there's always going to be power users, and there's always, there's more personal preference than I think I once thought. I think in the types of LLMs that people want to interact with. Some people really want the sycophant, which was what the 4.0
Hmm.
complaint was, because it's probably a better listener for you, for your robot boyfriend or girlfriend. But yeah, that's where we are right now. Let's talk a bit about the other announcements GPT has had, though, in terms of codecs and the CLI, and you mentioned you're using that now. Do you have anything else to add on their rollout of that? Are you using any? Do you use codecs in the web at all?
No, I don't. I'm using the CLI exclusively, and they're clearly putting more investment into it. I think they just announced some updates that I haven't even read in the last 24 hours. So it's really nice to have a competitor to Claude Code, because Claude Code, in my opinion, is top of the line if you want a coding experience. If you're trying to do vibe coding at the highest level, Claude Code was pretty much the only answer until now. And I think it's giving it a real run for its money, if for nothing else on speed, but I think the quality of the output is really good. It doesn't have some of the features from Claude Code that I really love, like running things in the background, running processes in the background so that it can read the server logs and you don't have to think about starting up your development environments. But that'll get there, I'm sure. It just really, I don't know how it's going to shake out, but confuses me and frustrates me to no end is the realization, going back to what we were talking about a second ago, that there are better models that are available. And that initial coding experience that we had where you could just create anything and it worked and it was quick, that didn't go away. It just got taken away from
Yeah.
us. And so in my mind, the more competition, the better. Let these guys burn CapEx as much as possible to feed our coding habit. And we'll see where it goes. I don't know how that's going to end up though.
Well, I think that's a segue to our conversation on Claude here. So the news coming out of Anthropic and Claude has been a real mixed bag lately because of the changes they've made to their tiering on Claude Code and their different subscriptions. And a lot of that has to do with what you were just saying. They are clearly losing money on power users, I think is probably the most direct way of saying that. And so they've changed the caps, instead of a daily limit to a weekly limit, and they've lowered them, and they did all of this, kind of, and they basically asked for forgiveness, not permission, and that, which is their right, I think, as the provider here. Has that affected your usage of Claude, or are you less affected by this because you're on the $200 plan?
Yes, I am less affected by it because I'm on the $200 plan. And also, we're way past the era of just saying continue, continue, continue. So everything that we're doing now requires a lot of thought. And I can't really hit the usage limit unless I'm running 3 projects concurrently or 4. And if I'm doing that, my brain is not in it enough to be doing a good job anyway.
Sure.
So I'm hitting more of a token limit. So yeah, I think that it's remarkable how slow and how blatant the throttling
Yep.
of Claude Code has been, especially over the past week. And you see people talking about it everywhere. People are leaving the platform in droves. I'm not there yet, but it makes perfect sense that they would do that. Look, the changes to the subscription model absolutely make sense. It was wide open before, and you had people running 24/7 migrations on 6 instances on their machine. They were just cranking through tokens because it was truly unlimited. That makes sense to govern. I do wish that they would allow us to pay more for a model that wasn't so nerfed, because I would gladly pay $1,000 to be able to use a model that worked the way that it did in the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. The other news coming out of Claude right now, though, is their new browser agent. What is that called, actually?
I can't remember the name, but it's basically just the something that gets installed in Chrome, and you can tell it to take actions and it'll do it. But we don't have much information because it's not out. Is that
Right.
right?
Yeah, I found it. Claude for browser. Claude for Chrome is what it is called. Um, and I'm sharing a research preview video of it to give people a sense. But it's part of this larger trend of, of agent tools taking over software as opposed to writing software, writing code or writing text or creating images. And so it gives access to your browser in this case to act on your behalf, click things, fill out forms, all that sort of stuff. And, this kind of concept has been around for a while now, relatively speaking, in this world. OpenAI's operator mode, and then they had an agent mode, had purported to do the same thing, really. But everybody's taken a new crack at it, and it does seem like hopefully they're getting better at this. Sam, I think this is a huge deal once somebody can crack it, because I think it potentially eliminates the need for all kinds of automation software. The businesses and enterprise can keep their exact software stack that they have and where all their data is and let AI sit on top of it and act on their behalf. Changes the ball game considerably and makes the pain for developing new AI solutions plummet. And so I think that is the promise of that. I have no idea if we're there yet, but I think you might view this a little bit differently. Do you view the promise of this any differently? Do you think somebody's going to get there?
I think we will get somewhere like there eventually, but I'm pretty skeptical in the near term. And the reason is I played with Operator a lot. I played with Agents some. And the problems that you run into are hard to imagine ways around because they require giving AI control of things that you're very unlikely to want to give them control of. For instance, the example that they always use is booking flights.
Yep.
I don't know why they use that example because the vast majority of people are not going to actually give AI control of doing that. And so what's it doing? It's saving you the challenge of typing in, I want to go from here to here on this day, except that you still have to do that in the chat.
Yep.
You're just doing it in the chat instead of clicking around a little. So it's not really saving you that much time. I mean, I guess theoretically it could go look at a couple of different sites and find you the best deal. But in practice, most of the data that you want to interact with, or much of the data that you want to interact with and do meaningful things with on the internet, is either too large for that to be efficient. So like all of the work that we're doing for our enterprise clients, I'm dealing with something that has 38,000 rows. What are you going to do in the browser with that? So you can't touch that. Or I'm dealing with information that's behind a paywall or behind a login. And am I just going to give this access to 1Password? I don't think so.
Okay.
So
Well,
I don't know. I don't know how that's going to work.
I think there's lots of enterprise grade bad ERP software out there in the world, right? Where like the pain of doing, I don't know what an example is, expense reports or doing resource planning or receiving bids from, if we have a client and they need to get quotes for or something in their supply chain from 7 different vendors or something like that, and vendor management software, right? All those things are slow and clunky. You can carve out a good career for yourself by just being willing to deal with the frustration of dealing with those things. And I think that's a perfect use case for something like this to sit on top of that can go click the right button, have the right drop down and make sure the fields are filled in a way that the system's going to accept, and get rid of headaches and make all that stuff faster. In parallel, that's the power of this. It's not that I think like activities that you seldom do, plan a vacation, you do every couple months at most, right? I think that's the worst possible use case for this. It's something that somebody has to do multiple times a day, across a business, and that stacks up. And I think that's the
yeah. And I guess it depends on to what degree you can train it. If you can say, watch me do this workflow, and then it can follow that, but it's not just the old school macro style, very deterministic, but it's actually using the LLM to make decisions. Sure, maybe. We'll see. I'm excited to try it. I really am struggling to think of use cases. So maybe if anybody has any in the comments, let us know. We'll figure it out.
Well, one I saw, which was near and dear to our heart because it's similar to some products we actively have, was in, LinkedIn outreach. So the ability to take control of your LinkedIn, do research on a prospect, write a thoughtful connection message to them without having to ever scrape LinkedIn. The AI is in your browser. It's reading the profile, the prospect's profile, and then on the fly coming up with the strategy and doing the outreach for you. And it's just doing that repeatedly throughout the day. I think that's a clear use case where, these systems, the question is, for how long will LinkedIn let you do that? Because doesn't seem like they want you to do that, right? It muddies their
Yeah. And then a technical question I will have that will be answered really quickly when we get a preview of this is, is it functioning like Operator, where it's opening its own instance on their virtual machine? Or is it actually operating within your browser? And so you're authenticated within LinkedIn. Those are two fundamentally different
Well,
experiences.
it seems clear to me that Claude in Chrome is in your Chrome, or else it's wildly misnamed.
Yeah, it probably is. We'll see.
Yeah. All right, cool. Let's get to the meat of our discussion today, which is a paper from MIT that everybody's talking about. Let me pull it up here quickly. It is titled The State of AI in Business 2025. And the major headlines from this that you're seeing everywhere are that 95% of AI projects in the enterprise are failing. Sam, I think we need to talk about what's actually in this paper and what's not in this paper and how to interpret it. But I want to start with just your high level. What's your reaction to this? Did you read it? What did you think?
I did read it. I think that it brings to light some important things that anybody getting into AI should know. I think, as is often the case, the media took it the completely wrong way. And if you just read the headlines and you don't dig into it, you're going to miss out on the real lessons here. The real lessons being obscured by the fact that much of this data was from much earlier implementations. Much of this data comes from the scenarios where a CEO hears about AI and gets excited about it and then tasks people to go do it without much forethought. And they're using potentially older models. They're diving into the most obvious areas like sales and marketing, where we found over and over that those are the most difficult, not focusing on the boring back office areas where it seems to have a really high ROI relative to other places. So yeah, what was your take on it?
I thought there was a bunch of good stuff in it. Everything you just said was true, but it's not like this is a hit piece or something like that. I don't think the writers of this paper have a vendetta, against AI or anything like that. I think the clickbait headlines and everything like that is where this has gone sideways. But I found a lot in this paper that resonated with our experience and also to be sort of useful in how I develop frameworks and talking to clients about how to do this right. It's not that there's nobody driving ROI with AI right now. It's that the playbooks are not codified in any meaningful way. And so a lot of people are doing this wrong right now. Everybody's grasping around in the dark, trying to make this work. And the pace of change in AI is one of the primary things that's making this so difficult. So one of the big takeaways I took from this is the leading indicator of whether an AI project is going to succeed or not. There were a few in here, but the one that I'll mention here is, does the AI pilot have the ability to learn, and is it adaptable? It's like people are getting projects approved to build AI software at a single point in time using models and business processes and all that sort of stuff when it was approved. Then they are rolling it out and they're frustrated that by the time they roll it out, it's no longer state of the art, and it's also not flexible. So it's not able to self-improve. It's not able to learn. It's not able to do any of those things. And I think that's just like, we've been almost struggling to find ways to say that or justify that in various ways with clients, that like the way to succeed in this world right now is your systems have to be adaptable. They have to be self-improving, and you have to be able to try things out at an individual level.
What does that mean to self-improve? Obviously, like I had huge benefits across all our projects simply by going in and switching the model from, GPT-3 to GPT-5.
Yep.
And you had to make some minor API changes, but we saw dramatic improvement from that. Is there more that you can do beyond, or is there more recommended in this paper beyond just updating your models?
Yes, absolutely. It's multi-agent systems, basically. So it's you have an agent in the system whose job it is to go back and update the context and the system prompts and basically the instructions that the system has itself and how it works. So that if you go through, what's a good example of this? If it's a customer service agent, right? And a customer has a really bad experience because the conversation went sideways. An agent needs to be able to look at that transcript, diagnose what happened, and give instructions back to the back of the system about how that agent should get better. So it's a different role for the agents to play in the software. So somebody's job in the stack needs to be, how do we make this better?
Yeah, there should be a name for that, like the recursive loop agent or the recursive improvement agent or something like
Right.
that, because that really should be in every project. It makes me think about how in every single project that we deploy, there's, depending on the scope, 2 weeks or 2 months of effort just to get the initial infrastructure in place and the architecture such that the data flows are working the way that you want them to, and the initial prompts there. And we don't, because it doesn't make sense, we don't spend too much time on prompt engineering at that stage. We're simply hooking up the parts.
Yep.
And then when you turn it on, often that first pass of return and output is underwhelming. And I think our clients have been really great at recognizing now's where the real work starts, or now's where a lot of the thinking work starts. Now's where we start doing true prompt engineering. But I think that's underappreciated until you dive in and experience that.
Oh my God.
And you have to make it through that hard part.
I feel like on every project we've had, I've told the client, listen, everyone, the first version of this is going to suck. Like we have to get through that, and we have to get with what the output is from the AI so that then we can go back and make it better. And that is, I think that we're just doing that at scale is sort of the principle and the lesson here of just like, you need to accept that the results, getting the system working is just step one, right? And then making it good is step 2 through forever.
Yeah. And often it's not that it's minor changes to the prompt system that makes it work better.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of our last big project that we did where I spent a month of hard work just wiring everything up and then delivered the first thing to them. And I could tell the client was a little disappointed, and it bothered me enough to where I worked all weekend, which, is only 10 or 15 hours or so, but I worked hard that weekend to make it work, and then came back on Monday and it kind of blew them away.
Right.
That's all that it took once everything was wired up. So yeah, that's a real lesson. It's cool that they articulated that.
So I'm going to go through my recap of this, just so if anybody didn't have a chance to read this, they kind of get my Cliff's notes of it, right? And then you tell me which of these what's the right word, takeaways you want to pull apart. All right. So
Cool.
First is that adoption does not equal transformation. So 80% of the companies surveyed tried ChatGPT or Copilot or some version of that. 40% deployed something, but it mostly improves individual productivity, not enterprise ROI. So this is a big thing. I think that the companies, the way that this study was done was mostly through interviews and surveys with leadership. And it wasn't on their books, it wasn't on their bottom line. It was those individuals self-reporting whether AI had a meaningful impact on their bottom line. I think that was the way that the question. And a lot of people reported individual productivity gains. Yes, they use this, but the systems weren't responsible for increase in margin or increase in revenue to a level that they thought was easily kind of defendable. Second, strategic partnerships work better than internal builds. Now, this is obviously maybe potentially self-serving here, but the data in the study was pretty crystal clear that external partnerships with businesses that were experts and that were able to build, adapt, change, and undertake kind of the training and all the other support around AI systems outperformed internal pilots that were done. This made me think just about because it's easier than ever to create software. I think it doesn't feel as important as maybe it once did when you signed a big 7-figure SaaS contract. You know what I mean? And so I think a lot of these projects are failing because somebody does something cool, they demo it to the company, they go, oh yeah, that is cool, let's roll it out. But they don't put any thought into how do we actually train people on it? How do we actually get people to adopt it and use it? How do we actually overcome those hurdles to make it anything other than novel? Third was back office wins out over front of office. And this is, you mentioned this before, but I found it was actually pretty cool to see data support this, because this is a thing we've seen and felt in our clients, but didn't actually have the case, the meat behind it. But the biggest ROI was found in back office improvements. So deterministic software, the less sexy of projects, as opposed to front office sales and marketing activities. The study found that there was quite a bit of sales and marketing in terms of early adoption and use, but those teams weren't consistently using the tools, or they were trading afterwards, or they weren't getting the uptick in sales response or close rates or any of those metrics that they were tracking. Whereas the projects that focused on incremental improvement on small workflows in the back office were the ones where the clear benefit was found all around. Last one, I really loved this term. I think we're going to use it. Shadow AI. Shadow AI is real. And that throughout the companies surveyed, while these formal AI projects, failed 95% of the time, almost all of the companies and all the employees surveyed were using AI that wasn't actually strictly deemed, okay by IT. So people are using the models. They are using the tools on their own. They're going out there and finding and dropping the $20 a month for the accounts. And they're reporting productivity gains. Nobody questions that. But those models, those consumer grade models and tools are better than the custom versions that these businesses are building themselves. And so why would you use the kind of worse, more brittle version that your company said was okay when the consumer model's there? So those were my Cliff's notes. Which of those do you want to pull apart, Sam?
I like the last one, but at the risk of being self-serving, I'm really interested to talk about why projects done in tandem with partners make more sense and tend to work out. It's a really interesting topic because it's not, at least in our experience, it's not what I expected. I expected that we would be successful primarily because we are experts and we've been doing this for as long as anybody's been doing it. And we know a lot about how to make these systems work. And it turns out that the real value that we provide, I think, is, and this isn't meant to sound like a sales pitch at all. It's just really interesting to reflect on. It seems like the real value that we provide is, on the one hand, we are business guys, not coders. And I think it's hard for people to find people who can produce code that also really understand business. And that's where we come from. But now we happen to produce code as well. But also, to knock us down a peg, they have all of the technical resources to do what we do. And most of the clients that we talk to,
Yep.
They don't have the time.
Yep.
And they simply don't have the bandwidth to jump on some new thing. Everybody's busy. Everybody has 10 projects that started 2 years ago that they're still working on. And what I've started to call the tiger team approach, where you come up with 3 projects, you drop us or some provider in and let them go after it, I think is pretty beneficial for, most companies that are trying to get into AI.
Yep.
Just because it is isolated, it is separated, it can move really fast. And if you find the right team to do that, it seems like it's working.
I also think this is a new genre of consulting and software, right? And there's a bit of lack of empowerment is kind of one way I'd put this, right? Because like the kind of work that we see and the kind of work described in the study of the stuff that works is more akin to business process optimization than it is software builds. Because you are interviewing potential users for how they do their job. And you're trying to identify areas where you could make things go faster, improve the actual output of it, and using automation and AI where possible. And that often means some change in behavior as well to how the work gets done. If you could just get data here instead of there, we could run the rest of this for you, or something like that. And I think that's really hard for an internal stakeholder to do. You get a lot of benefit from an outside consultant coming in and actually documenting the workflows themselves and making these suggestions, and then talking to the boss's boss about how maybe this could be done a different way and wouldn't this work, and think about the numbers and building a business case and all that sort of stuff. And I think inside of enterprises, that's incredibly difficult to actually pull off, on top of your actual day-to-day job responsibilities.
Yep, totally agree. What was the last one again?
The last takeaway? It was shadow AI. So this is not saying that AI is not driving productivity increases. It's that the company sponsored initiatives to build AI or to buy AI are not resulting in bottom line ROI. So the actual individuals are reporting, I think it was, well, I'll find the stat. I don't want to misquote this, but I'm pretty sure it was like 70% of the people surveyed were using AI daily and were reporting increases in productivity. But of those same organizations, only 40% of them actually had IT approved access to an LLM. So it was like they were clearly going outside the business to get this.
Which makes perfect sense. If you're a marketing ad writer, there's no way that you're going to be writing ads by hand now.
Yeah.
Why would you do that?
All right. If we were to, from this, develop some principles and activities of kind of a framework of how people could not be part of the 95%. So rather try to be part of the 5% that is seeing these demonstrable results. How would you synthesize that and codify that? Let's start with just some principles, right, that we believe and that are backed up by this paper of how to structure these. Any principles off the top of your head that you think are worth kind of putting up on the whiteboard as these are things you should never you should not question, these are what you must follow when evaluating AI projects?
I think build fast and build small is a great principle because it allows you to not find yourself 3 months down the line with an obsolete product. And if you build small, it's inherently easier to change. So it's nothing to change the model as the underlying foundational models advance. But even if you want to change data architecture, if you found a project that only takes a month to deploy, then it's just easier to find the necessary code and go tweak it to meet a new business case or to solve a problem with it. So I think build fast, build small is a great starting point.
I'll add my next one. My first one is that play uncovers value. And what I mean by that is I think these rigid, brittle systems that have to be fully documented up front, and then you're not going to know for months about whether it works or not, is just never going to work in this new paradigm that we live in. I so often find I'm not sure what the AI is capable of until I try 3 or 4 things. And then I figure out along the way how it works. And that spirit of play of, I wonder if it can do this. I wonder if I can add this feature. I wonder if this is going to, that sort of thing is how I uncover, the value along these things. And I think how you open up in your organization that sort of tiger team mentality of that kind of experimentation and play is where you're going to see the major breakthroughs that change businesses.
Yeah, it's almost like you need to create the space for a business hackathon, right? What's the hardest part of every one of our sales processes? It's convincing the client to just give us the data and let us poke around.
Yeah.
That's always the most valuable part and the most difficult part up front. And it's not, we'll sign NDAs and it's not even a privacy concern. Usually it's just, okay, I got to go find out how to export this. And there's 3 different places that we need to export from. And this one guy has access to it, but I don't. So yeah, that figuring out the inputs, putting those inputs in one place. That's another thing that I would say is just almost a philosophical underpinning. Come to these projects with the data in place, with the data extracted if possible. What is our starting, or just outline what data is available if you don't actually want to do the export. We have this data living in this system and this other data living in this system. And if we put them together, there might be some interesting stuff, and we want somebody to play with that, whether it's an internal team or an external provider. I think that's a great starting point for anybody.
So what about a principle around front office versus back office? I'll go ahead and say, I don't think that's actually a principle. I think that's where the value has been driven right now. And it's an interesting fact, I think. And I think if anything, the back office is undervalued, it's underweight. And that's why I think it should kind of be up and up. But I'm not of the opinion that there's not valuable applications here in sales. I just think they're more flexible, or, it's more probabilistic, and it still doesn't replace the value of a good salesperson, all those sorts of things. But do you think there's a maxim here? There's a principle about back office or front office?
Not a principle so much as a gotcha to avoid. That would be something like a chatbot is going to solve all our problems, which we saw in the early days. Everybody wanted a chatbot. Just put a chatbot on my data. That was the default project for everyone. And we know now that doesn't make sense. And in the same way, just do AI to our marketing automation, I think is not the most sophisticated, initial step. So I don't think it's a principle as much as a trap to avoid.
I've got a principle I want to pitch to you, which is, what's the pithy way of putting this? You can't outsource your expertise, maybe some version of that. But let me tell you what I mean, and then we'll come back to what the phrasing is. I see the best value right now in AI being expert in the loop automation. And what I mean by that is I don't think people want the AI to actually tell them what their marketing strategy should be. I don't think AI can be the best outbound seller or replace the need for, the expert in outbound sales. I don't think it should, be the expert in your tax strategy or anything like that. or any of those things. I think it should work for the experts in each of those scenarios, and do all of the grunt work and all of the homework, and make the process, the kind of high value expert services that are offered by those people, much faster and more efficient. But you want the expert at the end to look you in the eye and say, this is the work, this is going to work, all those sorts of things in both creative and non-creative fields. And so for like the sales and marketing, I think that's absolutely kind of is in concert with what we've seen. I think the AI is more than capable of doing the research on the prospect and coming up with some interesting ideas. But you need somebody there who's leading your sales team, who actually understands your positioning, who kind of understands human psychology, and and actually is able to make connections with people and all those sorts of things. I don't see how you can avoid that. And I think that same thing lives across the enterprise.
Yeah, I think that actually goes up and down the entire chain. It's the exact same thing with coding itself. You are not going to be as successful using AI to code unless you are functioning as the expert and you're really steering it.
Yep.
I mean, you have to read every single thing that it comes up with in the plan, or it's going to go off and do something stupid. I think what that leads me to, the corollary of that is, or what follows is, what is the perfect AI, I want to say engagement, but how do you set that up for success? And to me, the very simple version of it is you pick a person whose job you want to improve, a single person. And then you have some AI nerd like us or somebody internal go in and just sit with that person for a day and bug them about what is the most annoying part of your job, what would save you the most time, and start there. And I bet in almost 90% of cases, you're going to find some really easy, fast wins where you're building something quick that is just knocking off hours and hours from that person's day to day, and go from there. If you want to be high impact, I can't think of anything better than just like forward deploying an AI nerd to the most valuable people in your organization.
Yep. That's a good segue into the activities here, not principles, but activities of how you go about doing this. I think, yes, that's absolutely one. I think automation of repetitive prep and analysis is just such a clear thing. You look for areas where you can shrink timelines. You look for areas where you can access data or increase data where you didn't think it was before. I think that's a thing we come across all the time. Companies think they don't have the necessary data to do, AI automated workflows, but they're sitting on, miles and miles of call transcripts, which they wouldn't call data because it's not ones and zeros, right? But it's like SOPs, call transcripts, FAQs, text documents,
receipts,
all of that stuff, right, is gold here. And I think the last activity in terms of measurement is something I would mention. I think businesses have to figure out how to measure not just the financial ROI, but the increase in productivity and the increase in quality that is allowed from this. And I think you should see ROI eventually from those things. But if you can increase the quality of your deliverable, your business's deliverable, your widget through AI, or you can do it faster, you can make your employees better, it's got to be worth doing. If it doesn't fit on this quarter's balance sheet, I think you just need to play a little bit longer game. And that is sort of a measurement problem.
Yep. Makes sense.
All right. We've talked a lot about this. Anything final messages on the MIT paper itself, Sam?
I think we covered it pretty well. It's a good read. I'd recommend anybody diving into it or anybody who's curious in this stuff to actually read the paper, and you'll definitely find some kernels of wisdom in there for sure.
Then let's close with just this question. What's got you excited in AI right now?
That's easy. I wanted to test out the GPT-5 within OpenAI's Codecs CLI. And I never want to start on something like that with a client project. I want something that's kind of throwaway. And I'm in the process of moving banks. And so I'm moving from Morgan Stanley to E-Trade. And I wanted to, for the first time ever, have all of my financial data be easily accessible via API and be analyzed. And so that's why I chose E-Trade, actually. So it's my first time to connect to a financial institution API, and it's pretty cool. Essentially, I just sucked all the data in and spent a lot of time creating a snapshot of my financial life. So what are the accounts? What's the cash value of the account? What are the positions in the accounts for equities? And then I have a GPT-5 run analysis on how to categorize those as, bonds, equities. What's the fee structure of those? Are they international or US based? And it's taking a lot of the data that you get from E-Trade, but is not in a form factor that can be analyzed by an LLM, and essentially concatenating all of that into a single large JSON output that I can then pair with a philosophy that I've also put in the system as well, just an investment philosophy, and then pass that as context to any query. So if I say, what should I do next? It gets all of my financial information, my investment philosophy, and then can answer accordingly. Or I could say, what should I do with excess cash or whatever? It's been really fun. It took a weekend to knock out. I made the interface look like the Matrix. And yeah, it's been fun to play with. Oh, there's a video on this that I did too, if anybody wants to check it out
Yep.
on our YouTube channel.
I'll mention, I also, we both made videos on personal projects this week. I made one on a tool I made for my fantasy football draft. It happened on Tuesday. I'm really happy with my team. I think it was great. But yeah, it was to that point of, I just wanted a project that was fun. Again, build something, silly and accomplish that. It was great. The other thing I am excited about, I think this Nano Banana, the new image model from Google. It's not, I think it's good enough to actually drive, new businesses and new value, as opposed to, I think, a lot of other things which were prototypes that were cool proofs of concept. So I'm excited to see what happens to that. I'm going to continue to try to find applications for it, throughout what we do and what we do elsewhere. So couple of good things to be excited about.
Awesome. We'll have to share some of those next time.
Yep. All right. Well, good to see you, Sam. Thanks everybody for listening, and we'll see you soon.
Yeah. See you next time.